Have you ever walked away from an interaction feeling strangely exhausted, confused, even doubting yourself without knowing quite why? Perhaps the other person seemed charming, even attentive at first, but slowly the space felt like it belonged only to them, as if your presence, your voice, your emotions were being quietly erased. These moments are not just odd social encounters. They can be signs of something deeper, especially when they repeat themselves in certain relationships. Many of us, knowingly or not, have interacted with individuals who carry narcissistic patterns. People who seek constant affirmation, who manipulate affection, who draw you in and leave you questioning your worth. In my work, I've come to see narcissism not as villainy, but as adaptation, a way of surviving early emotional wounds. Beneath the surface, there is often a child who was unseen, unmet, who learned that love must be earned and that being real was not safe. From that place, one may construct a personality that demands admiration and fears true vulnerability. So what can we do when faced with this kind of energy? How do we protect our peace without becoming hardened or reactive? The answer doesn't lie in trying to fix the other. It lies in returning to something within ourselves, something simple but often neglected: authenticity. Authenticity is not a performance. It is not loud. It is the quiet act of being true to ourselves. It means knowing our needs, honoring our limits, and allowing our emotions to exist without shame. And when we embody authenticity, we become quite naturally a presence that narcissistic patterns cannot control. Their tactics fall flat, not because we resist, but because we no longer play the game. But living authentically is not easy, especially if we grew up learning that our real selves were too much, too sensitive, or not enough. Many of us learned to survive by becoming who others wanted us to be. And now returning to our true selves can feel unfamiliar, even risky. Still, the journey inward is the most protective thing we can do. Because authenticity is not just self-expression, it is self-connection. And when we are connected to ourselves, we are not easily manipulated. We stop giving away our energy to those who seek to dominate the emotional space. So I invite you to stay with me as we explore what authenticity truly is and why it quietly disarms narcissism without conflict, not through resistance, but through presence. Are you ready to rediscover the power of your own truth? Then let's begin. What is authenticity really? And why does it hold such quiet strength in the face of narcissism? To me, authenticity is not a performance. It's not a moral posture. It's not an achievement or a virtue in the way society often frames those things. It is at its root a state of inner harmony, a coming home to oneself. It is the quiet alignment between what we feel, what we need, and how we live. Not perfection, but coherence. To be authentic is to live in truth, not necessarily the grand truths we might proclaim to others, but the small, intimate truths we whisper to ourselves, often in the dark. It is the capacity to recognize one's strengths without falling into arrogance, and to acknowledge one's limitations without tumbling into shame. It is a tender equilibrium, one that emerges not through force, but through contact with the self, with our wounds, with our story. This kind of inner balance is not something we are taught in school. In fact, many of us learn to disown it very early in life. In childhood, we often had to choose between two essential needs: authenticity and attachment. When being ourselves threatened our bond with caregivers, we chose attachment because survival depended on it. And in doing so, we began the slow separation from our true selves. So the work of adulthood in many ways is not to become something new, but to return to who we were before we learned to hide. Those who live authentically are not untouched by trauma. On the contrary, many have walked through fire. But instead of being consumed by it, they have allowed the experience to clarify what truly matters. They do not wear masks to win favor or build identities around performance. They are not interested in convincing others of their worth because their sense of worth no longer depends on being believed. One of the most striking qualities of the authentic person is emotional regulation. That doesn't mean they are always calm or pleasant. It means they allow their emotions to flow through them without being hijacked by them. They know when to speak and when to be silent. They are unafraid of vulnerability not because they are fearless, but because they are anchored. They are self-possessed, which is to say, they inhabit themselves fully. I have always spoken about the necessity of feeling one's emotions, of not suppressing them or running from them, because emotions are messengers. They carry information from within. And when we shut them down in the name of politeness or control, we sever the pathway back to the self. Authenticity, then, is inseparable from emotional awareness. You cannot live in truth while ignoring what truth feels like inside your own body. Another quality that defines authenticity is an inner stability that does not rely on external validation. These individuals are not swayed by status or approval. Their center of gravity lies within, not outside. So when others are impressed, they don't puff up. When others disapprove, they don't collapse. Because they understand that neither adoration nor rejection defines who they are. I often say that dependence on external affirmation is a sign of inner disconnection. The more disconnected we are from our essence, the more we seek to define ourselves through mirrors we cannot control. And yet, the authentic person is not aloof. They are not above emotion. In fact, they tend to radiate a quiet peace, a sense of ease, because they are no longer at war with themselves. They no longer perform for love or camouflage their pain to appear strong. They bring their whole selves to the moment, gently, honestly. I remember once attending a seminar, a large room filled with professionals, intellectuals, people with strong opinions and louder voices. Near the back sat an older man, quiet, unassuming. He barely moved throughout the session. At some point, the moderator opened the floor for comments, and this man slowly, deliberately stood up. He said with a calm voice, "I'm not looking for anyone to agree with me. I simply want to speak what feels true to me." And then he sat down. There was no applause, no argument, just silence, a deep silence. You could feel it ripple through the room like a stillness that made people suddenly aware of their own masks. That to me is the power of authenticity. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't manipulate the room. It simply enters as it is, untouched by strategy, unconcerned with outcome, and in doing so, it transforms the atmosphere. Authenticity is not dramatic. It is not noisy, but it carries a resonance that is unmistakable. It invites rather than compels. It disarms not through power, but through presence. And when someone rooted in authenticity comes into contact with someone who relies on control, manipulation, or performance to feel secure, something profound is set into motion. Because authenticity, by its very nature, cannot be manipulated. It cannot be seduced by charm or coerced by fear. It sees through the game, but does not play it. And so in a world increasingly saturated with noise, with image, with curated selves, those who live in truth become both rare and deeply unsettling to those who do not, but also deeply healing to those who are ready to return. What lives in you when you are not performing? That is the question authenticity asks, and we begin to answer it not through grand declarations, but by slowly, gently reclaiming what has always been ours. There's something quietly powerful about a person who doesn't flinch when confronted with manipulation, who doesn't crumble under judgment, who doesn't internalize someone else's chaos as their own. I've often been asked, how do we protect ourselves from narcissistic behavior without becoming hardened, combative, or distant? And the answer, as I've come to see it, lies not in any outward strategy, but in the quiet strength of authenticity. When we are rooted in who we are, deeply honestly, we become difficult to manipulate. Not because we resist forcefully, but because there's nothing in us that can be easily hijacked. Authentic people have a way of disarming the narcissists, not by confronting them directly, but simply by refusing to dance to their rhythm. Let me explain. When someone deeply anchored in authenticity is faced with a narcissist's criticism or provocation, they don't rush into self-doubt. They don't spiral into questions like, what did I do wrong, or how can I fix this? Instead, they pause, they breathe, and they understand often without words that this reaction, this storm in front of them, does not belong to them. They don't personalize it. I recall a woman I once worked with. Her name was Maria. She was thoughtful, soft-spoken, and emotionally attuned, but for years had struggled in a friendship with someone who demanded the spotlight, who subtly and not so subtly made her feel inadequate whenever she didn't conform or agree. In group settings, this friend would interrupt, dominate, and redirect every conversation toward herself. If Maria expressed a differing opinion, she would be met with exaggerated disappointment, passive aggression, or guilt-tripping. Now, Maria didn't fight back. She didn't accuse or argue. What she did was far more disruptive. To the narcissist, she didn't take the bait. She didn't make it about herself. She recognized the pattern, the manipulation, and instead of defending or explaining herself, she would quietly step back. Sometimes she'd excuse herself from a gathering. Sometimes she would simply stay silent and not feed into the drama. Her energy, her peace was something she chose to protect, not out of pride, but out of deep self-respect. And here's what's fascinating. Her friend couldn't stand it. She grew more frantic, more controlling, trying to regain the emotional upper hand. But Maria didn't budge, not because she was cold, but because she was anchored. This is the unshakable nature of authenticity. But let's be clear, people like Maria are not immune to pain. They are not untouched by trauma. In fact, many authentic individuals are precisely who they are because of the wounds they've walked through and integrated. True authenticity often arises from the ashes of suffering. It is born when someone has been broken open, and instead of numbing, instead of armoring up, they choose to feel to heal and to learn how to live in alignment with themselves. I often speak about trauma, not as what happens to us, but as what happens inside us in response. And healing, as I've come to understand it, isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about reclaiming the parts of ourselves we abandoned in order to survive. People who've done that work carry themselves differently. They are no longer controlled by the need to please, to be liked, or to prove their worth. And this is precisely what makes them so difficult for a narcissist to manipulate. They know who they are, and they know when to walk away. One of the quietest, yet most courageous acts of authenticity is recognizing when a space, a dynamic, a relationship is no longer safe, and stepping out of it without shame. Maria, for instance, reached a point where she didn't feel the need to justify her boundaries. When her friends' conversations became emotionally exhausting, she would simply say, "I need some space right now. Let's talk another time." There was no hostility in her voice, only clarity. She wasn't trying to teach her friend a lesson. She wasn't punishing. She was simply choosing herself with grace. And interestingly, her friend reacted with silence for days, as if the absence of emotional control had pulled the rug out from under her. What Maria did wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. You see, when someone no longer feeds the narcissist's need for attention, validation, or emotional dominance, the narcissist loses their leverage. And this is where authenticity becomes, if you will, a kind of shield, not a weapon, not something used to attack, but a quiet, steady shield that prevents invasive energies from entering. The narcissist might try love bombing, lavishing affection, compliments, grand promises, but an authentic person senses the dissonance. They feel the imbalance, and they don't get swept up in it. They might encounter demands for constant attention or dramatic gestures designed to create guilt, but they don't respond with guilt. They respond with discernment. Because when you live in truth, it becomes almost impossible for manipulation to stick. It's not that you don't feel hurt. It's not that you never question yourself. It's that you know how to return again and again to what is real inside you. You are not shaken by someone else's chaos. You are not defined by someone else's projection. You are not trapped in someone else's emotional web, because you have something far more solid beneath your feet, a sense of self that is built not on performance, but on presence. This is what I've seen time and again in those who have committed themselves to living authentically. And this is why narcissists, when faced with such people, often become agitated, confused, even avoidant. Not because they've been confronted, but because in the presence of truth, their tactics simply don't work. They may react by pulling away, gossiping, lashing out, but they will rarely, if ever, succeed in destabilizing someone who has come home to themselves. So if you've ever felt weak for walking away from manipulation, I hope you see now it's the opposite. It takes immense strength to not engage, to not react, to not collapse into the guilt and confusion that narcissistic behavior can create. Authenticity in this way is not just a virtue. It is resilience. It is clarity. It is freedom. And in a world where so many wear masks, speak in rehearsed tones, and seek validation in the eyes of others, The authentic person becomes quietly radical, unaffected, steady, and deeply, beautifully whole. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share next may surprise you even more. It is one thing to understand authenticity from within, but what happens when the narcissist finally sees it? When they confront a presence they cannot shake, cannot win over, cannot break. Let's look closer. When a narcissistic person encounters someone rooted in authenticity, something inside them begins to shift, though not in the way we might hope. Rather than curiosity or connection, what often arises is disappointment, deep, palpable frustration. Why? Because the strategies they've relied on, the manipulation, the demand for attention, the subtle or overt control suddenly lose their effect. They find themselves face to face with something they cannot move, shape, or twist, a presence that does not yield to their need for dominance. I've seen this dynamic unfold in countless lives. The narcissist, accustomed to drawing others into their emotional orbit, expects the same submission from everyone. But the truly authentic person simply doesn't play that game. They won't let themselves be interrupted or pulled into drama. When a narcissistic person tries to shift the conversation, redirect attention, or assert control, the authentic individual listens, acknowledges calmly, and then continues. They stay centered. They keep the focus where it belongs, not out of rebellion, but because their compass points inward, not outward. They do not try to humiliate. They don't retaliate. They don't aim to shame the narcissist into reflection or guilt. They don't need to. Their power is not in offense, but in quiet stability. They simply do not move. And that, for the narcissist, is deeply unsettling. When someone is addicted to external validation, when their sense of self depends on how others react to them, encountering someone who will not react, who will not twist themselves to fit their expectations, can be profoundly disturbing. Often, what arises is not just disappointment, but contempt, a subtle or sometimes blatant disdain. The narcissist may feel irritated, even repulsed. There's something about authenticity that offends them, not because it's wrong, but because it mirrors what they've lost or never dared to find in themselves. And so they retreat, not always visibly, but you may notice the whisper campaigns, the undermining, the backhanded comments behind closed doors. They'll mock the person they cannot shake. They'll avoid them in future gatherings. To us, not because that person harmed them, but because that presence, so rooted in truth, was unbearable to be around. One woman once wrote to me about her former husband, a man she described as charismatic, but quietly controlling. For years, he had shaped the emotional landscape of their marriage, guiding the conversation, influencing how she felt about herself, demanding her praise while ignoring her pain. Over time, through therapy and deep inner work, she began to change. She started to name her boundaries. She began to honor her own truth. One evening, as he raised his voice to demean her in the way he always had, she looked at him and said quietly, "I no longer accept the way you speak to me." That was it. Just one sentence, not shouted, not dramatic, but deeply, clearly, and fully real. And in that moment, something changed. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just shut down. A cold silence followed, then distance, then disappearance. He didn't try to lure her back with grand gestures. He didn't shower her with apologies. He vanished. Because what she had shown him was a kind of truth he could not manage. Her authenticity was no longer something he could mold. And that frightened him. This is what often happens. The narcissist stops trying, not because they've grown, but because deep down they sense a kind of boundary that cannot be breached. Authenticity creates a natural firewall, one that repels falsehood. Without aggression, there's no performance, no pleading, just presence. And that's often enough to end the game. There's another group of people I want to speak of here, the truth tellers. Those who even as children could feel when something was off, who noticed when adults smiled through clenched teeth or said things they didn't mean. These children weren't rude, they were awake. Their internal alarm systems were sensitive, attuned to inauthenticity in ways that made others deeply uncomfortable. I once met a young girl, only 10 years old, who told me something that has stayed with me ever since. She said, "I don't like it when grown-ups pretend to be nice to each other. It makes my chest feel tight." She had seen her teacher speak kindly to her mother, only to roll her eyes the moment she turned away. And this girl, this child with no agenda but truth, said to the teacher, "I don't think you really like my mom, but you smile anyway. That makes me feel unsafe." The teacher, perhaps embarrassed or unsure of how to respond, called her disrespectful. Later, she told others the girl had a problem with authority. But I knew, and the girl knew, she was simply speaking from her truth. And that, for many adults, is too much, because it reveals something they work hard to hide: their own disconnection from authenticity. And narcissists, perhaps more than anyone, are disturbed by those who see through them, because they've built their world on image, on performance, on a fragile sense of worth that depends on others not seeing what's underneath. And when someone truly sees them, not with judgment, but with calm clarity, it can feel like a kind of emotional exposure, too raw to tolerate. That's why in the presence of authenticity, they often withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they cannot remain in a space where their tactics fail, where their mask no longer works, where they are no longer the center, and so they leave. Not always physically, but emotionally. They disappear into avoidance, sarcasm, silence, or gossip. Anything to protect themselves from the quiet pain of being truly seen. Which brings us here to a different kind of question. If authenticity is so powerful, if it has the ability to disarm manipulation and protect us from emotional games, then how do we cultivate it? How do we build that kind of presence within ourselves? And why is it not a simple switch we can flip, but a lifelong practice? A return again and again to what is most real inside us. There's something I want to share with you today, something simple but not easy, something soft but deeply powerful. It's the path of authenticity. Authenticity is not something you either have or you don't. It's not a quality stamped into your character at birth, nor a badge you earn after achieving some ideal version of yourself. No, authenticity is something else. It's a returning a returning to what has always been inside you, a process, a journey, a practice. And like any practice, it unfolds over time, slowly, gently, courageously. Let me say this, before anything else, you don't need to be perfect in order to be authentic. You don't need to have everything figured out or speak your truth with perfect clarity or never make mistakes. You only need to start with where you are right now, with what's real. That's enough. So, how do we begin? We begin by noticing the moments when we have stepped away from ourselves. You see, we cannot live in our truth if we don't first recognize the moments we've abandoned it. Ask yourself gently, have you ever smiled when you didn't want to smile? Said it's okay when something clearly hurt you? Agreed to help someone while your own heart was aching for rest? I once worked with a man named Kevin. People loved him. They called him kind, generous, easy to be around. But in therapy, Kevin admitted something quietly, almost in a whisper. He said, I don't remember the last time I said no. He had been so afraid of being rejected, so afraid of disappointing others, that he had stopped listening to his own needs long ago. He wasn't being cruel to himself. He was surviving. But the cost was disconnection. And the first step for him was not to demand answers or make bold declarations. It was simply to begin noticing, gently, without judgment. I just told someone I was fine, he said one day, but I know I'm not. That recognition, that moment of quiet self-awareness, is where authenticity begins. The second practice is to write. Not for an audience, not for Instagram, not for a polished memoir, but for you, just for you. Write as if no one will ever read it. Let the sentences be messy. Let them be angry. Let them be raw. Let them be true. You might begin with questions like, what did I say today that wasn't aligned with my truth? Who am I trying to please? If I wasn't afraid, how would I live? Am I betraying any part of myself right now? I remember a woman named Elena. Every night, she would write just one sentence in her notebook. I wish I could have said this. Today, just one line. And she did that every evening quietly for 3 months. And then slowly, something began to shift. She started saying those words, not just to her journal, but to her husband, to her mother, and finally to herself, out loud in the mirror, gently with dignity. Writing when done honestly is not a performance, it's a remembering. The third practice is learning to say no in a kind and grounded way. You see, boundaries are not walls, they are invitations. They are the quiet lines we draw to let others know where we begin and where we end. Without them, authenticity dissolves into exhaustion. It becomes endurance, not truth. I've often said, and I still believe, that you cannot heal while abandoning yourself to please others. Saying yes when you mean no doesn't make you generous. It makes you invisible. I once guided a client through her first experience of setting a boundary. She was terrified, but I asked her to keep it simple. She looked her colleague in the eye and said, I understand why you need that, but right now I can't. No apology, no lengthy justification, just truth. Her voice trembled, yes. But when it was over, she cried not from fear, but from relief. She said, that was the first time I didn't betray myself. There was something sacred in that moment. The fourth step is perhaps the most tender of all. Allow yourself to feel. Authenticity doesn't mean being calm and composed all the time. It means being honest about what's alive in you. Sometimes that's sadness, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's envy or fear. None of these emotions make you broken. They make you human. Try this the next time you feel something uncomfortable rising in you. Place a hand gently on your chest and say how you are feeling and that it will be okay. Not because you like it, not because it's easy, but because it's true. I once sat with a mother of 3. She confessed something in a small voice. I feel jealous of my friend who doesn't have kids. She has freedom. I feel horrible for thinking that. I told her gently that feeling envy didn't mean she loved her children any less. It simply meant that there was a part of her that needed space, needed breath. And when she began to honor those feelings, instead of pushing them down, something offends inside her. She began to find small pockets of freedom again. And with that came more joy, more patience, more truth. Finally, we come to the 5th and most compassionate truth of all: be gentle. With your regressions, there will be days when you fall back into the old roles, when you play the pleaser, when you smile through discomfort, when you avoid conflict. That's not failure. That's practice. Every time you catch yourself abandoning your truth and bring yourself back even slightly, that's progress. I've written before, and I still hold this as deeply true. You don't have to heal in order to be worthy of love. You are worthy because you are alive, because you are here. The practice of authenticity is not a checklist. It is not a 5-step formula. It is a homecoming, a quiet, slow return to what has always been yours: your voice, your presence, your being. And no matter how far you think you've drifted from it, you can always return. Always. So I leave you with this. Authenticity does not arise from shouting the truth. It emerges in the stillness when you stand quietly, unwaveringly in the center of your own being. When you live this way, you don't need to protect yourself from narcissists or manipulators. You simply stop feeding their power. You change the atmosphere. You become a place where truth lives and where pretense cannot survive. As we come to the end of our time together today, I want to gently gather what we've explored. We've looked at the quiet but profound power of authenticity, especially in the face of narcissism. And I want to remind you, authenticity is not simply a personality trait. It is not a performance. It is a way of being, a posture of presence built on self-awareness, emotional regulation, and the courage to create healthy boundaries. When we live from a place of authenticity, we become less vulnerable to the tactics of manipulation, guilt, and control. We stop feeding the dynamics that once drained us. Instead, we embody something else, something steady, something real. In that presence, the narcissist's usual strategies lose their grip, and often they simply move away. But this isn't a story about defeating others. It's a story about returning to yourself, about facing those inner shadows, those psychological ghosts we've inherited or suppressed, and choosing again and again not to abandon ourselves. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's possible, and it's worth it. So I want to thank you. Truly, thank you for spending this time with me, for listening with openness, and for being willing to consider the possibility that your truth is not only welcome, but needed. Your attention, your care, your presence here. It's what keeps this work alive. It's what encourages me to continue sharing what I've learned through decades of listening to people's pain, their longing, and their quiet strength. The journey of becoming more authentic is deeply personal. No one else can walk it for you. But you're not alone. We are not alone. If you feel moved, I invite you to share your own experiences. What has it been like for you to face a narcissistic presence while trying to stay true to yourself? What have you discovered about your own voice, your own needs, your own limits? I would be honored to hear your story. And perhaps in sharing, we can offer each other the gift of recognition, the gift of knowing that we are not isolated in this experience. And if this reflection has felt meaningful to you, consider sharing it with someone in your life who might also benefit from this gentle reminder that they too have a right to live in their truth. When we nourish authenticity, not only in ourselves, but in each other, we contribute to a world that is less afraid, less performative, and more grounded in what is real. Thank you for being here. And if you wish to keep exploring these human questions with me, I welcome you to subscribe, to stay connected, and to return when your heart is ready for more. Until then, may you continue this journey with tenderness, and may you walk it not as a task to complete, but as a home you are slowly learning to return to. I'll see you again soon.